All right, so get this. We're talking about a medical emergency you probably haven't heard of, but it's more common than you'd think, and it involves, well, your brain.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
Today, we're diving deep, no pun intended, into status epilepticus.
SC, yeah.
SE, and let me tell you, after going through this research, it's way more intense than I ever imagined.
It really is. It's one of those things, it doesn't always get the attention it deserves, but the impact, it can be huge, life-altering even.
So for those of us who, didn't go to med school, break it down for us. What exactly is status epilepticus?
Basically, it's a seizure that just won't quit.
Okay.
Either it lasts way too long, or someone gets hit with multiple seizures one after another, and they don't, fully recover in between.
So it's not just a single seizure, it's about how long it lasts and whether the brain can, reset itself.
Exactly, and that's where things get really serious.
This article mentions temporal thresholds, T1 and T2.
Ah, yeah.
What's the significance of those?
Those are like critical time frames. In SE, time is brain. T1.
Yeah.
That's like the point of no return.
Oh, wow.
If a seizure keeps going past T1, chances are it's not stopping on its own.
So that's when you have to get really aggressive with treatment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then there's T2, even more critical. That's the point where the risk of permanent brain damage, it shoots way up.
Wow. So every minute counts.
You got it. Every second, really.
What I find fascinating is that the article talks about different types of SE. It's not all like those dramatic convulsive seizures, right?
Yeah.
The ones we always see in movies.
Nope. And that's where things get even more complicated,
Yeah.
especially if you're in, say, an ICU.
Okay.
So you've got convulsive SE. Yeah, that's the one everyone recognizes. Muscle contractions, might lose consciousness. But then you have non-convulsive SE.
Non-convulsive.
I'm like, imagine a silent storm, but inside your brain?
A silent storm. That's a terrifying thought. So someone could be having a seizure, but you might not even know it.
Exactly. And it's not as rare as you'd think.
Really?
This article, it points out that a whopping 90% of SE cases in the ICU, non-convulsive.
90%. That's incredible. Like, how do you even begin to diagnose that? It's like a hidden epidemic.
It is. It really is. You're telling me diagnosing non-convulsive SE, it's like one of the biggest challenges in critical care,
Oh.
You really got to, channel your inner Sherlock Holmes. Got to connect the dots, figure out what's going on in there. And like any good mystery, you need to find the culprit, the root cause of these seizures.
Okay, so let's talk causes then. The article mentions a ton of them.
Yeah,
Sounds pretty varied.
it is way more than people think. So like in industrialized nations, a lot of SE cases, they come from stuff like strokes, brain injuries, tumors, basically anything that messes with how the brain normally sends those electrical signals.
Right, those make sense, but then the article mentions infections, even autoimmune diseases.
Yeah,
I wouldn't think of those as being connected to seizures.
it's a newer area, definitely, but it's huge. See, our immune systems,
Yeah.
they're powerful, right? Well, sometimes they get a little trigger happy, and they start attacking healthy tissue, including, you guessed it, parts of the brain.
So the body attacks itself.
Exactly. And when that happens, you get inflammation, and that can lead to seizures.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah, and it gets even more interesting. The article specifically calls out antibodies as a possible trigger.
Hold on, antibodies, aren't those the good guys? I thought they fight infections.
They do, but picture this, right? Sometimes those antibodies, they get a little confused, and in some people, they target the brain, leading to something called autoimmune encephalitis.
Autoimmune encephalitis.
Yeah, so it's not just about stopping the seizure at that point. We're talking about figuring out how to, retrain the immune system.
So it doesn't attack the brain in the first place?
Bingo. Which brings us to treatment.
Okay, because at this point, I think our listeners are probably thinking, okay, SC is serious, it's hard to diagnose, it's got a million causes, but what do you do about it?
You're spot on. The article lays out a three-step approach. They've even got a fancy diagram, figure 1, I think. It's kind of like levels in a video game.
Okay, I like where you're going with this.
Everyone loves a good video game analogy. So level 1, speed is key here. We're talking early SE and your weapon of choice. Fast-acting benzodiazepines.
Benzodiazepines.
Yep, they work fast, calm down all that overexcited activity in the brain.
So benzodiazepines are like the first line of defense?
Exactly. But let's say those aren't enough, right? We got to level up to established SE.
Okay, establish SE. What's next?
Now we're bringing in the big guns, non-sedating antiseizure meds. Drugs like levetiracetam or valproate. The article mentions them, table 4, I think.
So if benzodiazepines are the first responders, these are like calling in the cavalry.
Perfect analogy. And they work differently than benzos. Target different pathways in the brain. Like levetiracetam, it's thought to mess with like how certain neurotransmitters are released. And then you've got valproate, that one's got a bigger range. Enhances the effects of GABA, which is an inhibitory neurotransmitter.
Wow, this is getting complicated. So many different mechanisms. But what if those reinforcements aren't enough?
Then, my friend, we've reached the boss battle. Refractory SE.
Refractory SE, okay.
The seizures just won't quit. Those first two lines, benzos, those other meds, nothing's worked. Now we're talking ICU, maybe even anesthetics.
So that's when it gets really serious.
You could say that again.
So we've reached, like, the final level of this boss battle. Refractory SE. What's actually happening in the ICU at this point?
Things are pretty advanced. We're talking life or death decisions.
Yeah.
You know, the article uses these terms RSE and SRSE.
Right. Refractory SC and super refractory.
Exactly. RSE means those first two lines, benzos, those other meds, they haven't worked. The seizures just keep coming.
And SRSC, that's when even, like, the anesthetics.
You got it. Even knocking the brain out completely, inducing a coma, it's not enough. And that's when the risks skyrocket. Complications, brain damage even.
Yeah. So what can you even do at that point if those really powerful interventions don't work?
That's the million-dollar question. Table 6 in this article, it lays out some of the strategies. It's a tough balance, right?
Yeah.
On the one hand, you got to stop those seizures, protect the brain. But on the other hand, keeping someone sedated that long, especially with anesthetics.
There are definitely risks.
Oh, tons. Infections, blood clots, just from being immobile, muscle weakness. The list goes on. Doctors have to weigh the benefits against the potential harm.
So it's like a constant recalibration. What are some of the options they try in those situations?
Sometimes it's about finding the right combination of anesthetics. Or maybe adding other anti-seizure meds, even if they're not typically used for SE. And then there's the more experimental stuff,
Right.
like the ketogenic diet.
Wait, the keto diet, like for weight loss? I would never have thought of that for something as serious as SE.
Yeah, it is pretty wild, right? But we're talking about a very specific, medically supervised version. Basically, you slash carbs, pump up the fat, force the body to start using ketones for energy instead of glucose.
Ketones being.
They come from fat breakdown.
Ah.
And for some reason, we don't know exactly why, it can actually reduce seizures in some people,
Okay.
including RSE cases.
So you're basically changing the whole way the body works, not just targeting the brain directly. Are there other, like, cutting-edge treatments in the works?
There are. Brain stimulation is a big one, sort of like hitting a reset button on the brain's electrical activity.
Wow.
Still experimental, but there's a lot of hope there. And if the SE is caused by autoimmune encephalitis, those antibody attacks, then treatment has to shift to calming down the immune system. Things like IV immunoglobulin or corticosteroids.
Wow, so much of this comes back to the immune system. It's amazing how much progress is being made in understanding all of this. But I have to ask, with all these challenges, what does the article say about the long-term outlook for people with SE?
Honestly, it's a mixed bag. With fast, aggressive treatment, a lot of people recover well. That early intervention is key.
Okay, that's good.
But, and this is the tough part, the death rate for SE, it really hasn't budged much in recent decades.
Seriously, with all the advances in medicine, that's surprising. Why do you think that is?
Part of it's that diagnosis issue we talked about.
Yeah.
Especially with a non-convulsive type. Any delay in treatment, it can have a huge impact. And then there's RSE. Even with our best shot, sometimes it's really hard to get it under control.
Wow, it really highlights how much more research needs to be done.
Absolutely. We've got to figure out the mechanisms behind it, better ways to diagnose it, and, of course, more effective treatments.
Yeah.
For all stages, but especially that refractory stage.
Well, this has been really eye-opening. Status epilepticus, it's not something we hear about every day, but it's so much more common and so much more complicated than I think most people realize.
It really is.
I think what's really stuck with me is, yeah, the variety of causes and the fact that it's not always as dramatic as you might think.
Right. It's not always the Hollywood seizure. And that's a dangerous misconception.
Totally. If anyone's experiencing any kind of seizure activity, getting immediate medical help is crucial.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, I want to thank you so much for guiding us through this deep dive on status epilepticus. It's been challenging, it's been fascinating, and I think ultimately really important.
It's been my pleasure. These conversations are so important for raising awareness.
And to everyone listening, we hope this has given you a better understanding of SE, the complexities, and the research that's being done to find better treatments. Until next time, keep asking questions and stay curious.